Today, we are diving into a really provocative and, let's be honest, a highly controversial take on one of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. We're going to distill the core arguments from a book called JFK, A Very British Coup, written by John Hamer. Now, this book completely reframes the event, arguing that the real power behind the plot wasn't in Washington, D.C., but across the pond in London. So let's dig in and see how the author builds this extraordinary case. All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to follow the book's logic. We'll kick things off with the big question of motive. Then we'll try to identify this powerful group the author calls the unseen rulers. After that, we'll look at the enemies JFK supposedly made, break down the events in Dallas, and then at the end, tie it all together into what the book calls a grand conspiracy. You know, instead of getting bogged down in the endless debates about magic bullets and trajectories, the author starts somewhere completely different. He starts with a question that any good detective would ask first. And that question is summed up in this old Latin phrase, cui bono. It's simple, really. It just means who benefits. The author argues that when you look at the assassination through this lens, it stops looking like the random act of a lone weirdo and starts to look a lot more like a calculated political hit, an execution that certain powerful groups stood to gain a whole lot from. This quote right here really gets to the heart of the book's whole argument. The author is basically asking us to zoom way out from Dallas in 1963. He wants us to see the assassination not as the main event, but as just one single piece of a giant, complex puzzle, a key move on a much, much larger chessboard. And that brings us to the main villain of this story, at least according to the book. We're talking about a hidden power structure that the author claims is the real ruling force in the world. The author gives this entity a name, the Crown Empire. Now let's be crystal clear about something, because the book is very specific. This has nothing to do with Queen Elizabeth or the royal family. When he says the Crown, he's talking about a private, independent corporate powerhouse that's based in the 1 square mile city of London. This, he claims, is the absolute nerve center of global finance. So, who makes up this empire? Well, the author lays out a network of some seriously heavy hitters. He alleges it includes the City of London Corporation, the privately owned Bank of England, and something he calls the Rothschild banking cartel, which apparently includes huge international players like the IMF and the World Bank. He even throws global Freemasonry and major spy agencies into the mix as being part of this network. Okay, now here is where the theory gets really wild. The author's most radical point is this. He claims the United States isn't actually a sovereign nation. He points to a law, the Act of 1871, and argues that it secretly turned Washington, D.C. into a corporation, basically making the U.S. a vassal state that's financially owned and controlled by this London-based Crown Empire. So if this powerful hidden empire really exists, why on earth would it target President Kennedy? Well, the book lays out a whole list of ways that JFK supposedly challenged their power directly, and in doing so, made himself a whole coalition of very, very powerful enemies. First, let's talk money. The author zeroes in on Executive Order 111110. He argues this was Kennedy's big move to let the U.S. Treasury print its own money, United States notes, backed by silver. This was a direct challenge to the power of the privately owned Federal Reserve. According to the book, this was a straight-up assault on the banking cartel's control over the money supply.
Second, Kennedy apparently took on big oil. The book claims he wanted to slash this huge tax break called the oil depletion allowance. Well, you can imagine that didn't go over too well with the powerful oil barons, and the book specifically points a finger at guys like David Rockefeller for being furious about it.
Third, on the world stage, things were getting heated. The author highlights the intense pressure JFK was putting on Israel about its secret nuclear program at a place called Dimona. In the book's telling, Kennedy's hardline stance against Israel getting the bomb created another powerful and very motivated enemy. And finally, right here at home, his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, was waging an all-out war on the mafia. The book says this was seen as a massive betrayal by the very same mob bosses who, the author alleges, had helped get JFK elected in the first place. So just like that, a powerful ally becomes a deadly enemy. All right, so with all those motives and enemies lined up, the book finally turns its attention to Dallas, and it argues that the official story of what happened that day, well, it just completely falls apart when you look at all the strange things that went down. The difference between the two stories is just stark. On one hand, you have the Warren Commission's official, lone gunman theory. Lee Harvey Oswald, all by himself, fires 3 shots. Simple. But the book? It paints a picture of a sophisticated military-style ambush with multiple shooters in a crossfire, made possible only because the president's security was deliberately told to stand down. And the author builds this case by pointing to a whole list of weird anomalies. He talks about how Secret Service agents were supposedly ordered to back off the presidential limo, how the motorcade route was changed at the last minute to include that slow, sharp turn, not to mention the dozens of witnesses who swore they heard shots coming from the grassy knoll. In this story, Oswald is exactly what he said he was, a patsy. So this brings us to the book's grand finale, where all these different enemy groups, the international bankers, the oil guys, the spies, the mob, all get tied together into one single, coordinated plot. And right at the very heart of this plot, the author places a mysterious company called Permidex. He describes it as a front company, a cover for a top-secret assassination bureau run by Britain's own spy agency, MI6, using their old World War II network. So the assassination is framed as a massive joint venture where everybody had a job to do. The Crown Empire allegedly gave the orders and paid for it all. MI6, through Permidex, planned and carried out the hit. The CIA gave them support on the ground. The Mafia provided extra shooters and helped with the cover-up, and the pro-Zionist forces and Texas Wheelmen, along with LBJ, provided the motives and the crucial political cover back in the States. And this quote from the book really just says it all. It captures the incredible scale of the alleged conspiracy. In this view, it wasn't just a murder. It was a coup d'etat, plain and simple, carried out by an international shadow government to take out a president who dared to get in their way. In the end, what this book lays out is one of the most sprawling and, frankly, mind-bending theories about JFK's death out there. And it leaves us with a much bigger question to chew on. Why? Why does this one single event, more than half a century later, still have so many different stories swirling around it? What does it really mean when a single moment in history can produce a whole universe of competing, conflicting truths?